This is GreenShift, the climate podcast from Skift. I'm Darin Graham. At Skift, we've been covering the travel industry for a long time, looking at how airlines, hotels, and destinations all connect and evolve. But in this show, I'm trying to figure out what's really going on when it comes to travel and the climate crisis in an understandable and clear way, just talking to leaders in the sector to find out what they're doing and how this is affecting their businesses. This week, I'm going into the world of short-term rentals. Think Airbnb and Booking.com and the millions of hosts behind them. The market has exploded in recent years. In 2024 alone, it was worth over $130 billion. But there's a problem. It's nearly impossible to know how much carbon this sector is actually emitting. Platforms like Airbnb and Booking.com don't include emissions from guest stays in their climate reporting. And as many people in the climate space will tell you, if you don't know what you're emitting, you can't start cutting it. So I sat down with Marcus Räder, the co-founder and CEO of Hostaway. His company builds software that helps vacation rental hosts manage bookings, pricing, guest communication, and payments. He is often very vocal about climate change and its impacts on the travel industry. We talked about why this is such a big challenge for this part of the industry and how short-term rentals might actually have an opportunity to adapt and even thrive in a warmer world. You have got a very strong interest in climate change. So how did that come about?
Yeah, first of all, I have to admit I'm a little bit of a justice warrior myself. I like to defend the weak, or believe that I do, and I think part of that is because when we started Hostaway, we were the smallest. I mean, in the beginning, we had no product, we had no customers. Then we built a product, and we still didn't have any customers. That's when you're weak, and it's very easy for me to identify with a lot of our clients who sometimes are struggling, sometimes they don't know what to do, sometimes they lost it all and had to start all over. And I believe that a fundamental right that we should have as humans, that we happen to be on this planet, is to make sure that the planet stays alive, that we can enjoy nature. And right now, the free market economy has failed in that concept. We are destroying the planet as we speak. And that is something that I believe in. And that is something that I'm actively working to spread awareness and try to help as much as I can.
When it comes to climate change, what would you say are the main discussions happening in your sector at the moment?
Overall, there isn't a lot of discussion on how climate change is going to change vacation rentals. And I think that's because it's not a nice topic. It's not something people like to talk about. Because when you start looking at where vacation rentals are the strongest, which markets, it's quite different from travel overall, where there's some things in common. For example, Spain and Florida, they're popular in the travel world overall, but they're also popular in vacation rentals. But you got certain locations that are extremely vulnerable to changes in the climate. I remember booking a retreat for our executive team with one of our clients in Greece, and they had beautiful properties that could fit all of us. So I called them, and they said, "Oh yeah, this one that you're looking at, the pictures aren't the truth anymore because the forest burned down 2 years ago, and it looks terrible now. So let's get you on another one." And yeah, forest fires, floodings, massive storms. These are things that are going to drive a big change in the future. But it's something, because it's a local business, it's something that property managers or the industry isn't really talking about. Because the fact is, if you live on an island that's prone to storms or fires, or if you live somewhere that's prone to flooding, it's not like you can pack up and just take your life and your business and go somewhere else. That's not how this business works. Usually our customers, they're very local people. That's how they run their business, because they know the local area. And yeah, there's very little you can do actually as in the if you work in vacation rentals and you happen to, let's say, manage 20 properties in an area like this. other than packing up and moving away, which essentially means you lose your business and your life's work, there's not much you can do, unfortunately. I wish there was more. I think there's a lot more you can do as an individual.
Spoken about, people don't really like talking about it, but the impacts of it is something that people are talking about.
Yeah,
Have you heard many people speak about cost in your sector? So, for example, in Southern Europe, with the heat, having to use aircon more, electricity bills going up, insurance costs, and things like that.
absolutely. That's a big topic, but I believe a lot of people they don't connect the dots necessarily with climate change. So where
Hmm.
insurance costs go up because fewer insurance companies want to be in the market because of an increased amount of storms. Um, that's just the risk of doing business according to a lot of people, and it's very similar to the interest rates. The interest rates used to be zero for a long time, and now they're several percent. That means for property investors, they need to earn higher yield, and that's also a cost associated with it. But overall, I think the average operator wouldn't really think about it that way. Um,
Mm.
Mostly because there's not much they can do. And yeah, electricity, air conditioning is the same thing. You know, if it's too hot to survive without it, what can you really do other than install it and hope that people are willing to pay for it? The interesting thing though is people are willing to pay these costs. So I just had a look at the data for this summer. Summer is quite important for us because we got a lot of customers in North America and in Europe. That's high season. So this year we're actually looking markets have higher occupancy rates for the summer and at a higher price than previous year.
So it's busier and people are paying more.
Yes, exactly. And we saw the same thing during COVID when people stopped traveling to faraway locations or resorts or cruises and hotels. Suddenly, the demand for vacation rentals skyrocketed, and a large reason for that is that people can travel in a nice way locally. So, let's say you live in a city. Usually, you would go on vacation maybe to another city or some tropical island, but instead, perhaps you go somewhere nearby. Maybe you drive 2 hours outside and you can get a nice cottage or cabin in the mountains or by the lake or on a beach.
Or in the
And that's
woods.
something that people do in
Yeah,
addition to the people who travel in.
I do that.
Yeah.
Look for a nice cabin in the woods, 2 hours from London. It's just easy and it's nice.
Well, good for you. I live in Warsaw where it's flat and no matter where you drive, it's still flat. You have to drive at least 4 hours to get to anything exciting.
So you think in the short stay sector, essentially, you think things are going to become more costly for hosts and customers, consumers. Hosts will start thinking, my electricity bills have gone up, my cost needs to go up. But people will still come and they will still pay.
What's going to happen due to climate change is that vacation rentals are going to become more exclusive. I have some firsthand experience a few years back when Hurricane Ian hit the Gulf Coast of Florida. A very popular tourist destination called Fort Myers Beach was completely decimated. Well, the winter before that, I spent on Fort Myers Beach, and our condo was destroyed. It was on the fifth floor, but the water went up to the third floor. And that basically means that, well, it sucks for everyone involved. Now, we needed to find a place to stay the next winter. And actually, now it's been 4 years and the condo is still not ready to be used. It might be this year. We'll see. But they say that every year. It takes a long time to fix things when they break like that. So the rental market was completely insane uh, because, first of all, insurance companies, it's cheaper for them to get things fixed after a disaster quickly. The more you let it sit, the more costly it's going to be. So they are willing to pay to fly in crews. Oh, and you can't get any workforce. Anyone who knows how to fix anything, they're not available anymore because they're already booked. So you need to fly in people, have them stay somewhere, and the insurance companies can afford to pay. It's cheaper to pay a huge amount of rent to have the workers stay there and perform the work rather than, let's say, wait 6 months until there's local workforce available. So they took a lot of the spots, but then there were also people who still needed or wanted to stay there, like us. And then we had very little to choose from. And of course, what happened as well is that a lot of people chose not to go there, but then they went to other locations, and the prices in those locations went up as well. So we can expect more of this in the future, because when what really impacts the prices is the margin or propensity to book. So if you have a popular location that suddenly gets flooded or there's a fire, that means that tens of thousands of people are going to have to reschedule their plans. But if they already made arrangements for school, plane tickets, took time off work, probably they're not going to sit at home. They're going to go book somewhere else. So we see a lot more fluctuation in the demand in the future because popular destinations are getting hit.
And that experience that you had, did that sort of help you with this vision that you have of how things might be in the future? You were like, this, this is, we're going to have to adapt to all of these changes in patterns and behaviors possibly in the future if there are more disruptions like this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's one thing reading about it in the news. Like I read about the California wildfires that were here this year, but the fact is that there's hundreds of wildfires destroying communities every around the world every year, and those are not in the news. It's only when Paris Hilton's house on Malibu burns down, then all of a sudden everyone reads about it. But it was very interesting to see the media after Hurricane Ian, because they showed footage or news articles for around 2 days. It was everywhere, and then after 2 weeks it was completely gone. But even today they're still rebuilding. It's been 4 years and they're still rebuilding, and they've had two major storms hit after that have destroyed a lot of the progress, but nobody's writing about it. So just because you don't see these topics in the news doesn't mean that they're not happening. They are happening, and we see that all the time. Whenever there's a storm somewhere, we get customers reaching out and saying, "Hey, half of my properties are gone. What are we going to do now?"
And moving on to policies and things like that in the short-term rental sector, many businesses in the travel sector and in short-term rental and vacations have net zero policies, including the big players and smaller players. What do you think about all of these policies to become net zero by 2050? And do you think it makes a difference?
I think if a software company has a policy for net zero, and it works within a certain industry, I don't see how that has any impact whatsoever in the grand scheme of things. I can take us as an example. We are fully remote. So usually the biggest CO2 footprint in a company is people commuting to the office. And we eliminated all of that. We have zero commuting. My bedroom is right upstairs on the second floor there. That's how far I commute. I walk down the stairs, and now I'm in my office. And that goes for all our employees. So we are already more environmentally friendly than most companies around. But where I truly believe we can make an impact is not on whether our employees take a car or the bike, but instead where we can make an impact is making sure that we promote local businesses and traveling locally, because that is where a massive part of the CO2 footprint comes from, is moving goods and people. So rather than vacationing on the other side of the world, why don't you explore a new world that might be 1 or 2 hours away from your home? Maybe there's a paradise on earth right in your own woods, but you didn't know about it.
If you look at a country like England, it's often easier to fly somewhere else than to get across England, and cheaper. There's a lot of issues with domestic tourism on the other hand. And then the other point I wanted to put to you for your business, being a remote company, what about things like business travel, flying? Do you look at that?
Absolutely, and it's something that's a lot easier now that we're bigger, because if there's a trade show, we can send in the local people. So, for example, to a Spanish-led trade show, we would send in people from Spain so they can take the train, which makes it, yeah, that's where the economies of scale come in as well. We can be more more environmentally friendly just by our sheer size or volume. Um, but we don't have any strict policies. But for example, carbon offsetting on plane tickets, if people want to choose that option, would we pay for that? But if they don't want to choose that option, that's also okay, because I'll give an example here. Let's say that every plane ticket that we buy for our staff, if we add carbon neutrality, I believe that it will have less of a positive impact than if we save that money and we use it to grow our entire industry, so that people overall over the following decades travel more locally. I believe it will have a much more positive impact than just planting a few trees for one plane ticket. But like I said, we allow our staff to do that. But overall, what we're going to see in the coming decades is that things like you mentioned, that it's easier and cheaper to go take a plane to probably Spain from UK than to travel within UK. That will all change. I mean, we tried with carbon pricing schemes, but those, at least in North America, both in Canada and US, are, well, they're quite under fire, because they assume that the consumer needs to be responsible, and the businesses are responsible, and a lot of people are against that responsibility. It's the human defense mechanism that comes into play again. And I don't think the true cost is even reflected there. We're talking about fuel for maybe the flights, but there's a lot of other environmental factors there. And I think we don't even need policies. The market forces will make it incredibly expensive to travel far away in the coming decades.
We've got like sustainable aviation fuel, which a lot of the airlines and IATA are saying, this risks making tickets more expensive for passengers. Really, they're going to be the ones that are going to have to pay for this. And then now cruise ships as well, they're going to have a carbon tax on every ton of greenhouse gas that's emitted from a ship. They're going to have to pay a carbon tax. And they haven't said this is going to be passed on to the passengers, but when you start thinking about it, you're like, well, who's going to pay for this? Who's going to pay for this?
Well, I mean, we're paying either way. If we the taxes are a way to prevent the worst case from happening. The worst case is that your vacation in Spain is cancelled because of flooding, and then your backup plan to go to Greece, well, that's cancelled because of a forest fire. But you always have Madeira. Unfortunately, there was a storm last year, and the island doesn't exist anymore. That's what's going to happen if we don't do anything. And then it will get ridiculously expensive, because the only place you can go is probably going to be Malta, and everyone's already booked everything there, and all the plane tickets are gone. That's if you leave it completely free and don't tax anything. The other way of looking at it is, how about we pay a little bit up front now to have it cheaper later? And that's what carbon pricing essentially does. It says, hey, instead of having this tipping point where things become completely out of reach for everyone, let's gradually adjust so that we can enjoy a little bit now, but we can also enjoy a little bit later on.
And people will probably pay, but it might mean that, in the future, richer people will be the ones who will be able to, go where they want, which is the problem, isn't it?
And if you look at the real estate market, that's exactly what's been happening in the last about 2 decades, where a lot of the places where people live and used to be able to start families, now it's impossible to buy a home. And it doesn't matter if you sit in southern Spain, or if you sit in London, or if you sit in Berlin or New York or Los Angeles or Mexico City. The same thing is happening everywhere. And it's a pretty rapid acceleration of how a few people have access to things, but for more and more people, it will get out of reach for them. And the same thing will happen with travel eventually.
Do you think that short stay sector should be counting its emissions, as in, in the apartment or the house where people are staying and booking? And how could they do this? And is there anything that travel tech can do to help?
I think overall, yes, I do think we should have a system in place. But just let's look at another area, for example, just to find out how nutritious the food you're eating. There's a label on every food item. How many decades did it take to get that label? And that label is available pretty much everywhere. You go to Greece, you go to Spain, you go to UK, you go to Canada, you find the same label. You know how many calories, you know how much fat, and so on. That is not available for vacation rentals. We don't have a green label. I know real estate in Europe has a energy rating, and some countries have it more than others. Um, but it's not available for vacation rentals. Um, but it's gonna be decades before we have something like that, and I certainly hope so. That being said, I think the home that you're staying in is a fairly small percentage of the overall footprint that you're creating with a trip. So let's say you go out to a restaurant. Do you go to a restaurant that serves local food, or do you go to a restaurant that flies in food from all around the world? Well, that has a big impact. Also, how did you get to the vacation rental? Did you take public transport? Did you drive a car? Did you take a plane? Those have very different footprints, and that's something that I wouldn't even know if someone gave me the task to start defining this and measuring the footprint. I don't even know where to start, because you can have one property that has a different footprint for every guest depending on just how they got there and what are they gonna do there.
But isn't it that if the guest goes to a restaurant, the restaurants then fall under the restaurant's emissions, and the restaurant should be counting and recording? If the guest flew to a short stay rental, then that comes under the airline. But when the guest walks through the door of the property and turns on the heating, turns on the aircon, uses the lights, um, uses the water, wastes food, that comes under the property, but those aren't being counted. So some people might, but it's not widely being estimated. Do you think that's something that? But how would you even do that? I don't even know.
You're absolutely right there. How we would do that is honestly, it's like a lot of other sectors. The demand is going to come from the
Mm.
consumers. The reason why planes have the option to offset carbon emissions is that consumers stopped taking flights because of the carbon footprint. First, a very tiny amount, but then more, and that's why they put in the option, because they can make more money. Now, what we haven't seen, if you go and book your vacation rental, you can filter which one has a nice view. You can filter which one has how many
Yeah.
bedrooms. You can filter by the price and the location.
Balcony,
You can see the
rooftop, whatever you want.
exactly, but you can't filter based on how green the
Yeah.
property
You
is.
can't filter like renew. I want a place that's got renewable energy. You just can't.
Yeah, and so that's where it's got to start. Consumers have got to choose, because I guarantee you, the moment you can, we don't even need filters on this website. What you need is, if you have a property out there that you're renting out and it's actually sustainable, try it out for a week or a month. Put it in the title, put it in the description that, hey, we are more sustainable than anyone else. We got solar panels, we have backup batteries, we have energy saving, energy efficient, everything. And see, do you get more bookings? Do you get them at a higher price than someone who's not sustainable? If you do, this problem will solve itself. Suddenly, everyone, no, 6 months later, everyone will catch on and they will install their own solar panels and their heat pumps. But if you don't get more bookings at more price, then the consumers simply aren't ready yet. That means they're not willing to pay extra for the sustainability.
Other sectors like aviation, leadership bodies, lobbying bodies. So in aviation, they have IATA. It helps to set policies, get the sector aligned, and be like a voice for the sector. There's nothing like that, I don't think, in short stay, even though it's quite a big, massive sector and probably growing. Do you think it needs something like this, some form of leader?
It's been a pretty unregulated industry, and it needed regulation, but it turns out in different areas the regulations have had very different implications. And now we're starting to see the second wave where a lot of places are reevaluating whatever regulations were put in place. And yeah, we're going to need a couple more. If we put together an industry organization right now, it's going to be fully focused on those regulations, and it's going to be very local. It's going to be, what are we doing in this area of England, or what are we doing in this area of California? So it would be difficult to get, for example, climate change as a priority there, because we as an industry are still so young and grew so fast, and we receive so much attention that it's going to take at least a few years until we can even say that we are operating in the same way. It's still a very fragmented industry, unlike, just like airlines were in the beginning. You know, some had one plane, others had 10 planes, some operated certain routes, others flew wherever the customers wanted to go, and eventually it became pretty standard. But it took decades to reach that standard, and we haven't got there in vacation rentals.
You've got a small amount of major players, as in the platforms, the OTAs. So perhaps they could become leaders in this in climate change.
Yep, I'm certainly hoping so.
I mean, I know they're trying. They all have net zero policies, and they're trying to educate and things. So maybe it's starting. Maybe it's starting now in short stay.
Yeah, well, we're here to drive the change.
Oh yeah, one more thing, if you don't mind. At your company, do you ever have conversations with your stakeholders and your partners, like the big players in your sector, where they ask you, what are you doing on sustainability and climate change? What are your policies and things? Because you often hear from these businesses that, you know, one of the biggest challenges is working with stakeholders and suppliers to make sure they're aligned on their climate and net zero policies and so on. So I just wondered if you've ever been approached and asked things about your emissions or anything to do with climate change.
That's a really good question, and my mind is spinning here. Am I allowed to answer or not? What did those NDAs say? Because as you can understand, we talk about a lot of topics related to the business, and most of that is confidential because they're all publicly traded companies. So, you know, we not only do we get access, we don't maybe get access to their data, but we give them the private data that they can use, and that you see the earnings call, you see something mentioned 3 months later, and then it impacts the stock price. But I would say overall, it's probably not the highest priority, especially right
now. So, does the short-term rental industry need a climate leader? And if so, who's ready to step up? What's clear is this: the sector is at a crossroads. Climate change is becoming harder to ignore, and the pressure to act will only grow. But just like during the pandemic, local travel and short stays might actually offer a way forward if the industry is willing to make the changes now. Thank you for listening to GreenShift, the climate podcast from Skift. We're still a new show, so please don't forget to follow or subscribe on your podcast app. It really helps people find us. And if you've got an idea for an episode or someone we should talk to, I'd love to hear it. Drop me an email at dg@skift.com. And one last thing, our climate reporting at Skift is supported financially by Intrepid Travel. That support helps us tell more in-depth stories, but Intrepid has no say over what we cover or how we report it. See you next time.